A father abandons his wife and daughter as the business is about to go bankrupt. But years later, dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Sarah stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as she stared at the letter in front of her. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. It wasn't the first time she had read it, but each time felt like a fresh wound reopening. Sorry, Sarah, I can't do this anymore. The business is falling apart, and I'm not strong enough to handle it. I'm leaving. I need to start over. Please understand. Take care of Emily. The letter from her husband, Mark, was brief and emotionless, a stark contrast to the life they had built together. She looked around the house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now cold and empty. Emily, their teenage daughter, was upstairs in her room, likely lost in her own world, trying to process the sudden abandonment. Sarah wiped her tears and straightened up. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now, not ever. The business that Mark had left behind wasn't just any business. It was her family's legacy. A small, local bakery that had been in her family for generations. It wasn't just about the money. It was about pride, about history, and about providing for Emily. But the bakery was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Sarah knew she had to act fast. Mark's departure had left her with a mountain of debt and no clear path forward. She had never been the one to manage the finances or make the big decisions. That had always been Mark's role. But now she was alone in this fight. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her keys and headed out. The bakery awaited her, and so did the mountain of challenges that she would have to overcome. The bakery was only a few blocks from their home, a quaint little shop with a faded sign that read Miller's Bakery, in elegant, swirling letters. It had been a cornerstone of the community for as long as Sarah could remember. But now, as she approached the entrance, she saw the signs of neglect. The windows were dusty, the paint on the door was chipping, and the once bustling interior was eerily quiet. Inside, the smell of stale bread and old pastries lingered in the air. The display cases were half empty, the shelves sparsely stocked. Sarah's heart sank. She had known things were bad, but seeing it with her own eyes made it all the more real. "Morning, Mrs. Miller," came a voice from behind the counter. It was David, one of the bakery's longest-serving employees. He was in his 50s with graying hair and a kind smile, but today, his expression was one of concern. "Morning, David," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "How's everything going?" David hesitated, glancing around the empty shop. "It's been slow, ma'am. Real slow. We've had a few regulars come in, but..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah knew what he was going to say. The bakery was dying, and unless she did something drastic, it wouldn't survive the month. "I'm going to make some changes," Sarah said, more to herself than to David. "We'll turn this place around." David nodded, though there was doubt in his eyes. Sarah couldn't blame him. She doubted herself too. But she didn't have the luxury of giving up. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. She had no experience in running a business, but she knew she had to start somewhere. She began by listing everything she could think of that needed to be done: repairs, new inventory, marketing. The list grew longer and longer, and with each new item, the weight on her shoulders increased. She thought back to the days when her parents ran the bakery. It had been the heart of the neighborhood, a place where people gathered for more than just bread and pastries. It was a place where memories were made. Weddings, birthdays, anniversaries. The bakery had been a part of it all. How had things gone so wrong? Sarah realized that part of the problem was that the bakery had lost its connection with the community. It had become just another business, rather than the cherished institution it once was. If she was going to save it, she needed to reignite that connection. The next morning, Sarah got to work. She called in a favor from a friend who owned a small construction company, and within days, the bakery was buzzing with activity. The windows were cleaned, the walls were painted, and the old sign was replaced with a new one that gleamed in the sunlight. But cosmetic changes weren't enough. Sarah knew she needed to attract customers, so she began to brainstorm ideas. She reached out to local suppliers, offering to feature their products in the bakery. She organized a grand reopening event, complete with discounts, free samples, and live music. She even enlisted Emily's help in designing flyers to distribute around the neighborhood. The day of the grand reopening arrived, and Sarah was a bundle of nerves. She stood behind the counter, watching as people began to trickle in. At first, it was just a few curious passers-by, but soon the shop was filled with customers, old regulars and new faces alike. David was busy at the counter, serving up fresh bread and pastries, while Sarah moved from table to table, chatting with customers and thanking them for their support. The atmosphere was lively, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. But the true test would come after the excitement of the reopening faded. Could they keep this momentum going? Despite the success of the grand reopening, the following weeks were tough. The initial surge of customers began to dwindle, and Sarah quickly realized that running a bakery was a marathon, not a sprint. The debt loomed over her, and every decision felt like a matter of survival. Then came the setback. One morning, as Sarah was going over the accounts, she noticed something alarming. The numbers didn't add up. After hours of poring over the books, she realized that money was missing. Thousands of dollars that should have been there were gone. Panic set in as Sarah tried to figure out what had happened. Had she made a mistake? Was there an error in the system? But as she dug deeper, the truth became clear. Someone had been siphoning money from the business, and there was only one person who had access to the accounts besides her: Mark. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Mark hadn't just abandoned her and Emily. He had been sabotaging the business, likely for months before he left. It was a betrayal she hadn't seen coming, and it threatened to undo everything she had worked for. Sarah knew she had to act fast. She contacted a lawyer and filed a report with the police. But even as the investigation began, she couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. The bakery was barely staying afloat, and now this. How could she possibly recover? But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't afford to. Emily depended on her, and so did the bakery. With renewed determination, she threw herself into the work, cutting costs wherever she could, negotiating with suppliers, and finding new ways to attract customers. It was exhausting, and there were days when she felt like she was running on empty. But every time she felt like quitting, she reminded herself of what was at stake. This wasn't just about saving a business. It was about preserving a legacy, about proving to herself and to Emily that they could survive, even thrive, without Mark. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's hard work began to pay off. The bakery's finances slowly stabilized, and the community started to rally around her. Word spread about the quality of the products, and soon people from neighboring towns were stopping by to try the famous Miller's bakery goods. Emily, who had been distant and withdrawn since her father's departure, began to take an interest in the bakery. She started helping out after school, learning the ropes and even suggesting new recipes. Seeing her daughter's growing enthusiasm gave Sarah a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn this around. But the challenges were far from over. The investigation into the missing money revealed that Mark had not only taken funds but had also taken out a loan in the bakery's name, using it to cover his own debts. The bank was now coming after Sarah, demanding repayment. Faced with this new crisis, Sarah felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The debt was more than she could handle, and the threat of losing the bakery loomed large. But she refused to let despair take over. She had come too far to give up now. In a bold move, Sarah decided to expand the bakery's offerings. She reached out to local businesses and formed partnerships, supplying them with baked goods and catering services. She also launched an online store, offering shipping to customers across the country. It was a risky strategy, but Sarah knew that she had to take chances if she was going to save the bakery. The expanded offerings brought in much-needed revenue, and the online store quickly gained traction. Orders poured in, and the bakery's reputation began to grow beyond the local community. For the first time since Mark had left, Sarah felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Just as things were starting to look up, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. It was from the bank manager. Sarah's heart sank as she braced herself for more bad news. She had been dreading this call, knowing that the situation with the loan was still unresolved. "Mrs. Miller, I wanted to discuss the status of the loan," the manager began, his tone serious. "There's been a development that you need to be aware of." Sarah held her breath, waiting for the hammer to drop. "It appears that the loan was taken out under suspicious circumstances," he continued. "Upon further investigation, we've discovered that your husband forged your signature on several documents. This is a serious matter, and the bank is prepared to pursue legal action against him." The words hit Sarah like a truck. She had suspected that Mark had done something underhanded, but hearing it confirmed made her feel sick to her stomach. However, as the manager continued, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. "Given the circumstances, the bank is willing to work with you to resolve this issue," he said. "We can restructure the loan, and you won't be held personally liable for the debt your husband incurred illegally. We'll also provide some relief on the payments to give you time to get the business back on its feet." Relief washed over Sarah like a wave. This was the lifeline she needed, the chance to save the bakery and protect her family's legacy without the crushing burden of Mark's deceit hanging over her. She thanked the manager profusely and hung up the phone, her mind racing with possibilities. But even as the immediate crisis was averted, Sarah knew that the battle wasn't over. Mark was out there somewhere, and his actions had left a trail of destruction in their wake. She couldn't just let him get away with it. For her own peace of mind, and for Emily's sake, she needed closure. The decision to confront Mark wasn't an easy one, but Sarah knew it was necessary. She needed answers, and she needed to protect her daughter from any further fallout. After some digging, she discovered that Mark was living in a small town a few hours away, working odd jobs and laying low. Sarah arranged for Emily to stay with her parents for the weekend and set off to find Mark. The drive was long and gave her plenty of time to think. She went over what she would say, how she would demand answers, and how she would finally put this chapter of her life behind her. When she arrived at the rundown apartment complex where Mark was staying, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She hesitated for a moment, but then she thought of Emily and the bakery and everything she had fought for. With renewed determination, she knocked on the door. Mark answered, looking disheveled and surprised to see her. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I know what you did, Mark. The loans, the forged signatures, everything. The bank is going after you, and you deserve it." Mark's face fell, and for a moment, he looked like the man she had once loved, vulnerable and lost. "I never wanted it to get this far, Sarah," he said, his voice trembling. "I was in over my head, and I thought I could fix it before you found out. But everything spiraled out of control." "That's not good enough," Sarah replied, her anger boiling over. "You nearly ruined our lives. You left me to pick up the pieces while you ran away like a coward. I deserve better, and so does Emily." Mark looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "I know," he whispered. "I've made so many mistakes, and I've lost everything. I don't expect you to forgive me." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "This isn't about forgiveness, Mark. This is about making sure you can't hurt us anymore. I'm moving on with my life, and I'm going to rebuild everything you tried to destroy. But you need to face the consequences of what you've done." Mark nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'll cooperate with the bank, with the authorities. I won't fight it." "Good," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. "Because you need to take responsibility for once in your life. I'm going to make sure Emily and I are safe, and that the bakery, my family's legacy, survives. You're not a part of our future anymore." With those final words, Sarah turned and walked away, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. She had faced her past head-on and was finally free to move forward. The months that followed were challenging, but Sarah found strength she didn't know she had. The bakery continued to grow, bolstered by the community's support and the new business strategies she had implemented. Emily became more involved, learning the art of baking and taking pride in the family business. Sarah's relationship with Emily deepened as they worked together, turning the bakery into a thriving enterprise once more. The memory of Mark's betrayal faded, replaced by the satisfaction of their hard-won success. One day, as Sarah and Emily were closing up the shop, a local journalist walked in. She had heard about the bakery's turnaround and wanted to write a feature story on their success. As Sarah recounted the journey they had been on, she realized just how far they had come. The article was published a few weeks later, and the response was overwhelming. Customers poured in, eager to support the bakery that had become a symbol of resilience and determination. Business boomed, and Sarah knew that they had finally made it through the storm. But the real victory was the bond she had forged with Emily. They were a team, stronger together than they had ever been. The bakery was no longer just a business. It was a testament to their strength, their love, and their unbreakable spirit. Years passed, and the bakery flourished under Sarah and Emily's leadership. It became more than just a local shop. It was a beloved institution, known for its quality and the story behind it. People came from far and wide to taste the famous Miller's bakery goods, and to meet the women who had turned tragedy into triumph. As Emily grew older, she took on more responsibility, eventually becoming the primary manager of the bakery. Sarah, now in her 50s, began to take a step back, confident that the business was in good hands. She watched with pride as Emily continued the legacy, knowing that the bakery would be safe for generations to come. One day, as they were preparing for the bakery's 50th anniversary celebration, Emily found an old photograph in the back of a drawer. It was of Sarah's parents, standing in front of the bakery on the day it first opened. The pride and joy on their faces mirrored the emotions that Sarah and Emily now felt. Emily showed the photo to her mother, and together, they decided to frame it and hang it in the bakery as a reminder of where they had come from and what they had achieved. As the celebration day arrived, the bakery was filled with friends, family, and customers who had supported them throughout the years. Sarah stood in the middle of the crowd, watching as Emily greeted guests and served up the delicious treats that had made the bakery famous. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.